Close your eyes for a second and try to remember Christmas morning, 1985. Maybe you weren't born yet. That's fine, stay with me. But if you were there, somewhere in America, you probably remember the smell of pine needles from a real tree, the crinkle of wrapping paper that you'd saved from last year, because that's just what you did, and the specific feeling of pulling apart the pages of the Sears Wish book, which was basically the internet before the internet existed. Now jump forward 40 years. Christmas morning, 2025. You're checking your phone before your eyes are fully open, making sure the Amazon packages all arrived. Your tree is probably artificial, if you have one at all, and it's covered in smart LED lights you control with an app. Your kids didn't circle items in a catalogue, they sent you direct links to their Amazon wish lists. And that feeling you had on Christmas morning in 1985, that specific cocktail of anticipation and magic, it's different now. Not gone necessarily, just different. Here's the thing nobody really talks about. We didn't just change how we celebrate Christmas over the past 55 years. Christmas changed what it means to be American. And I'm not talking about the surface stuff. The fact that we spend $1 trillion now instead of whatever we spent in 1970. I'm talking about something deeper, something we can feel but struggle to name. This is the story of how we got from there to here. And I should warn you up front, it's not a simple tale of decline, and it's not a celebration of progress either. It's weirder and more complicated than that. Because the same 55 years that gave us Cyber Monday and AI shopping assistants also gave us the war on Christmas and the collapse of mall culture. The same decades that made Christmas less religious somehow made it more culturally important than ever. We're going to trace how an oil crisis in 1973 led directly to how you're celebrating this year. How a Philadelphia police complaint became Black Friday. How a single Mariah Carey song in 1994 became mandatory listening. And how a holiday that was supposed to bring us together became one of the main things we fight about. So settle in, because this is going to take a while. We're about to watch Christmas in America transform from a religious feast day into a fifth season, from a sacred ritual into a culture war battlefield, from a single day into a months-long economic event that determines whether retailers survive the year. And somehow, against all odds, 90% of us are still celebrating it. The question is, celebrating what exactly? There's this idea in retail that the year doesn't have 4 seasons. It has 5. Spring, summer, fall, winter, and Christmas. And that 5th season, it generates nearly 20% of annual retail sales in just 2 months. Put another way, 1/5 of everything sold in Teague America gets sold during the Christmas season. The National Retail Federation has been tracking this for decades, and the numbers tell a story that should probably make us uncomfortable. In 1993, Americans spent roughly $375 billion on Christmas. That seemed like an enormous number at the time. By 2012, that figure had climbed to $567 billion. Then the pandemic hit in 2020, and despite everything falling apart, Christmas spending reached $787 billion. People were losing jobs, stuck at home, scared about the future, and somehow still managed to spend more on Christmas than ever before. And in 2025, we're projected to cross a threshold that would have seemed impossible just a generation ago, $1 trillion. The first $1 trillion holiday season in history. But here's what's fascinating about that number. While Christmas spending exploded, religious observance collapsed. Weekly church attendance fell from 42% in the early 2000s to 30% by 2023. For the first time in Gallup's tracking history, less than half of Americans belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque. The religiously unaffiliated, the so-called nones, grew from roughly 10% in the 80s to 28% in 2024, making them the largest single religious demographic in America. Bigger than Catholics, bigger than evangelical Protestants, including 87% of people with no religious affiliation who still celebrate the holiday in some form. So what are we celebrating? That's the question that's going to haunt this entire story, because the answer kept changing, decade by decade, crisis by crisis, until we arrived at a version of Christmas that would be barely recognizable to someone from 1970. They'd understand the tree and the presents and the general shape of the thing, but the meaning underneath, the why of it all? That transformed into something nobody quite planned and nobody fully understands. The way Christmas evolved tells you everything you need to know about how America changed. The anxieties we couldn't shake, the things we decided mattered, the battles we chose to fight. Every shift in how we celebrated reflected something deeper shifting in the culture. And tracking those shifts year by year reveals a nation negotiating with itself about what it believes, what it values, and what it's willing to sacrifice to maintain traditions that may not mean what they used to mean. Let's start in the 1970s, because that's where the first cracks appeared. Not in the tradition itself, but in the prosperity that had allowed Christmas to become the spectacular, abundant thing it had been in the post-war years. October 1973. The Arab oil embargo hit, and suddenly the American way of life, built on cheap, unlimited gasoline, faced an existential threat. Gas prices spiked, supplies dwindled, and people who had never questioned whether they could drive wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, found themselves sitting in lines that stretched for blocks, hoping the station wouldn't run out before they reached the pump. This happened right before Christmas, and for the first time in the modern era, Americans were being asked to dim their holiday lights. Not because of taste or aesthetics, but because keeping them on felt almost unpatriotic. The National Opinion Research Center documented what happened next. In the 3 months following the embargo, reported difficulties with gasoline availability jumped from 21% to 37%. The biggest spike, right over the Christmas holidays. Think about what that meant. The tradition of driving around neighborhoods to see Christmas lights, that purely American ritual of piling into the car with hot chocolate, driving slowly past houses trying to outdo each other with decorations, suddenly felt frivolous, wasteful even. The grand tour to visit distant relatives became a calculated risk. Do we have enough gas to get there and back? What if the stations run out while we're gone? Families started localizing their celebrations, shrinking the radius of the holiday gathering to the immediate neighborhood or the single household. The big sprawling extended family Christmas, 30, 40, 50 people, started to feel like a luxury from a different era. And while some of that shift was temporary, something about it stuck. The intimacy born of restriction created a new template, smaller, more immediate, more self-contained. Then came stagflation. Inflation, which had been creeping upward since the mid-60s, accelerated dramatically through the 70s. By 1980, it hit 14%. 14%. Imagine your money losing 14% of its value in a single year, and then trying to maintain the Christmas traditions you'd grown up with. The cost of commercial goods rose faster than wages. Department stores still existed, and the Sears wish book still arrived in the mail like clockwork, but the gap between what you could circle and what you could afford kept widening. Families retreated from the store to the craft table. Popcorn strung on the thread became a decoration because it was cheap, not because it was charming. Cranberry garlands and salt dough ornaments filled trees alongside, or instead of, the store-bought glass balls that had defined the previous generation's aesthetic. The colour palette of the 70s Christmas reflected this scarcity. Harvest golds, avocado greens, browns. Earth tones, people called them, which was a polite way of saying the colours of things you can make at home with materials that don't cost much. The pioneer spirit aesthetic wasn't chosen from a design catalogue. It was imposed by economic reality. But even in the middle of this austerity, the seeds of future commercialisation were being planted. In 1973, the same year as the oil crisis, Hallmark introduced keepsake ornaments. This was genius, really. Instead of selling disposable decorations that you'd use for a season and toss, they rebranded the ornament as a collectible, something with potential future value, something you'd buy every year, building a collection that told the story of your family's history. That shift was profound. It introduced the concept of the ornament as a repository of memory. And once you've turned a Christmas decoration into a memory storage device, you've created an engine for perpetual consumption. Every year needs a new ornament. Every significant life event deserves one. Your collection becomes a timeline, and the gaps in that timeline, the years you skipped, start to feel like failures. Meanwhile, in America's cities, a different kind of darkness was settling in. Violent crime rates doubled from the early 60s to the late 70s. In New York City, murder rates rose by a factor of 4 between 1960 and 1972. This wasn't just a statistical abstraction. It changed the physical geography of Christmas. The tradition of window shopping along downtown avenues, of caroling in city squares, of experiencing the magic of the urban Christmas. All of that became fraught with genuine peril. Perceived and actual safety declined in tandem, and the celebration of Christmas retreated from the chaotic, uncontrolled public sphere of the city street into private spaces. Homes became fortresses. Shopping moved to enclosed malls, where security could be controlled, and the messy unpredictability of the city could be edited out. This shift had consequences that rippled forward for decades. The magical, serendipitous encounters of the urban Christmas, the street vendors, the Salvation Army bells, the strangers wishing you happy holidays as you navigated crowded sidewalks, gave way to the controlled, sanitized environments of suburban retail. Downtown retail districts began their long decline, and with them died a version of Christmas that was fundamentally public and communal. But here's what's interesting. While all this scarcity and anxiety was reshaping how people experienced Christmas, television was busy creating a new secular mythology to fill the gaps. Rankin-Bass animated entertainment, using their distinctive stop-motion technique, produced special after special through the 70s. Santa Claus is Coming to Town in 1970, The Year Without a Santa Claus in 74, Jack Frost in 79. These weren't just entertainment, they were theology for kids whose families might not go to church. They codified characters: Heat Miser, Snow Miser, Burgermeister Meisterburger, that had no basis in folklore but became just as canonical as anything in the Nativity story. And crucially, these narratives often mirrored the anxieties of the era. The Year Without a Santa Claus is basically about burnout. Santa's tired, disillusioned. He contemplates skipping Christmas entirely because he feels unappreciated and overwhelmed. Does that sound familiar? That's the mid-70s American psyche right there. The national malaise, the crisis of confidence, and the resolution, where children of the world mobilized to prove their gratitude, offered a cathartic fantasy of unity and purpose to a nation that desperately needed it. The 1970s Christmas, then, was defined by limits rather than possibilities. It was a holiday squeezed between geopolitical vulnerability and domestic economic erosion. And while some people look back on this era with nostalgia, the handmade ornaments, the simpler times, it's worth remembering that the simplicity wasn't chosen, it was imposed. The 70s Christmas was beautiful in the way that making the best of a bad situation can be beautiful. But it was also the moment when Americans started to realize that the unlimited abundance they'd taken for granted wasn't guaranteed. If the 70s taught Americans to expect less, the 80s taught them to want more, a lot more. And the place where that wanting was cultivated, nurtured, and ultimately harvested was the shopping mall. The enclosed shopping mall had existed before the 80s, but it didn't truly become the center of American life until that decade. Urban flight and crime fears of the 70s had driven families to the suburbs, and the mall followed them there. Climate-controlled, secure, and concentrated into a single location, the mall offered everything the chaotic downtown had provided, minus the danger and unpredictability. For Christmas, the mall became something close to sacred space. The mall Santa experience, which had existed in various forms before, achieved its apotheosis in the 80s. Elaborate Santa villages appeared in mall atriums, complete with elves, artificial snow, and intricate set designs that rivaled theatrical productions. This wasn't just about getting a photo with Santa, it was about immersion, about creating a Christmas experience that felt magical precisely because it was so carefully controlled. Malls understood that Santa was the ultimate loss leader. Families would drive across town for the Santa photo, and while they were there, well, might as well do some shopping. The relationship was symbiotic and highly engineered. Christmas became the season when malls showed what they could really do. The decorations, the music, the carefully orchestrated sensory overload, all of it designed to open wallets. This was the era when mall culture peaked. In 1980, the average consumer spent 12 hours a month at malls. 12 hours. It wasn't just shopping, it was socializing, entertainment. The mall was where you went to see and be seen, where teenagers hung out, where families spent entire Saturdays. And Christmas was when the mall revealed its full power. But the most significant commercial development of the 80s was the invention, or more accurately, the rebranding of Black Friday. The term had originated in Philadelphia in the 50s and 60s. Traffic police used it to describe the chaos caused by suburban shoppers and football fans flooding the city the day after Thanksgiving. It was a complaint, basically, a term of dread used by people who had to manage the congestion and disorder. Retailers hated it. The negative connotations seemed likely to deter shoppers. So through the 80s, the retail industry executed a brilliant piece of semantic engineering. They reclaimed the narrative, spreading a new origin story. Black Friday was the day retailers moved from the red, operating at a loss, into the black. Profit, success. The turning point of the fiscal year. None of this was true, by the way. Retailers had typically been profitable well before the day after Thanksgiving, but the rebranded story worked because it transformed a day of logistical dread into a celebration of economic vitality. By the late 80s, doorbuster deals had become standard practice. The psychology of scarcity was weaponized to drive frenzy. Limited quantities, doors opening at specific times, first come, first served. This fundamentally changed the relationship between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Thanksgiving had been about gratitude, a pause before the chaos of the season. But once Black Friday became a cultural institution, Thanksgiving became the starting gun for a consumption marathon. The day after a holiday dedicated to appreciating what you have became officially designated for competitive acquisition of what you don't have. The intensity of 80s consumerism reached its peak, or maybe its nadir, with the Cabbage Patch Kids riots of 1983. These soft sculpture dolls, each supposedly unique and requiring adoption rather than purchase, became the must-have toy of the season. And the demand sparked genuine civil unrest within retail spaces. Parents fought each other. Physical altercations. People trampled trying to reach the shelves. The images were shocking but also revealing. This was what Christmas shopping had become, a competitive sport, an adrenaline-fueled event where securing product felt like victory and coming home empty-handed felt like defeat. Manufacturers learned from this. They learned that artificial scarcity combined with media hype could generate demand that transcended rational consumer behavior. This lesson would be applied again and again. Tickle Me Elmo, Furby, gaming consoles. The pattern was set in '83, and it never really stopped. The aesthetic of the '80s Christmas reflected the broader cultural excess. The earth tones of the '70s were swept away by loud, eclectic maximalism. Gold and red dominated. Then the southwestern palette, mauve and teal, infiltrated Christmas decorating the same way it had infiltrated everything else. Trees became riots of mismatched ornaments, not curated designer trees, but accumulations. Plastic mixed with glass, mixed with tinsel, in quantities that prioritized abundance over coherence. This was also the golden age of the collectible Christmas village. Department 56 had introduced ceramic villages in '76, but they exploded in popularity during the '80s. These miniature illuminated winter wonderlands required dedicated real estate within the home, display space. And once you started a village, you had to keep expanding it. New buildings every year, more little ceramic people. The village became a project, a commitment, a way of performing Christmas that required increasing investment. There's something poignant about this, actually. These villages depicted idealized Dickensian town centres, the kind of quaint, walkable, community-focused spaces that the rise of suburban mall culture was actively destroying. People were buying expensive simulations of the very thing they'd abandoned. Nostalgia for a communal public square, miniaturized and illuminated and placed on a shelf in a house in a subdivision miles from any actual town centre. The '80s Christmas was about abundance, but it was also about anxiety. The anxiety of keeping up, of getting the right gifts, of your decorations measuring up to the neighbours, of securing the must-have toy before it's sold out. Christmas shopping transformed from a chore into competitive performance, and the stakes, social, emotional, financial, kept escalating. But underneath the glitz and the gold and the consumption, something was shifting. The religious foundation of the holiday was starting to feel optional for more and more people. Church attendance was beginning its long decline, and the mall, with its carefully engineered Christmas experience, was becoming something close to a secular cathedral. The ritual was still there. The gathering, the anticipation, the sense of something special happening. It had just been relocated from the church to the shopping centre. And instead of celebrating the birth of Christ, we were celebrating the opportunity to buy things. The '90s were supposed to be the victory lap. The Cold War was over. The economy was booming. The internet was arriving, promising to connect everyone and solve problems we hadn't even identified yet. And Christmas, having survived the scarcity of the '70s and the excess of the '80s, seemed to settle into a new equilibrium. But if you look closely, the '90s were when the unified monocultural American Christmas started breaking apart, not dying, fracturing, splitting into parallel versions that acknowledged the reality of an increasingly diverse nation. The musical shift happened first, and it happened definitively. In 1994, Mariah Carey released her Merry Christmas album, featuring a lead single that would become the last true addition to the American Christmas canon. All I Want For Christmas Is You. The Christmas music landscape had been frozen for decades. The airwaves belonged to crooners from the '40s and '50s, Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, Brenda Lee, songs that were beautiful but also time capsules from a very specific era of American culture. Carey's song changed that. She and Walter Afanasieff crafted something using a wall of sound production style that felt simultaneously timeless and modern. It sounded like it could have been recorded in 63 or 94 or 2015. The cultural impact is hard to overstate. The song didn't achieve immediate dominance. It grew slowly, year by year, becoming inevitable rather than instant. By the 2020s, it was generating an estimated $2.5 to $3 million annually in royalties alone. Total lifetime earnings exceeded $100 million. It set streaming records. It became the only modern song that could stand alongside the classics without feeling out of place. But here's what's significant. After Mariah, nobody else managed to break through. Plenty of pop stars tried. Christmas albums became a reliable way for artists to cash in on their fame. But none of those songs became canonical. Mariah's track stands as the last addition to the Great American Christmas Songbook, creating a clear bifurcation: the classic era and the Mariah era, and then nothing that really stuck. This mattered because it revealed something about Christmas culture. The canon was closing. The shared, universally recognized soundtrack was set. After 94, Christmas music became either nostalgia or novelty, but not tradition. Meanwhile, the 90s marked the peak of Kwanzaa's mainstream visibility. Created in '66 by activist Maulana Karenga, the holiday had existed for decades as a Pan-African celebration observed within black communities. But during the 90s, coincident with the rise of Afrocentrism and the growing economic power of the black middle class, corporate America suddenly noticed. Hallmark launched a line of Kwanzaa cards in '92. The US Postal Service issued the first Kwanzaa stamp in '97. Big box retailers like Kmart created Kwanzaa displays. This mainstreaming presented a paradox. On one hand, it validated Kwanzaa as a legitimate American observance. On the other, it commodified a holiday that had been explicitly created as an alternative to consumerist celebration. The 7 principles of Kwanzaa, including Ujima, collective work, and Ujamaa, cooperative economics, were fundamentally anti-commercial. The whole point was to celebrate African heritage and community values outside the capitalist framework of Christmas. But once retailers started selling Kwanzaa-themed products, that tension became impossible to ignore. You can't market anti-consumerism without undermining the message. Statistics suggest Kwanzaa's active public observation probably peaked in the 90s before stabilizing or waning slightly in the 2000s. It remained important within certain communities, but the broader mainstream integration that corporate America attempted never fully materialized. The holiday existed, was acknowledged, but remained somewhat separate from the dominant December cultural moment. A parallel transformation was happening with Hanukkah. Often described by sociologists as the Christmasification of the Jewish festival of lights, this trend saw American Jewish families elevating Hanukkah from a minor religious festival into a major gift-giving occasion. The driver was parental anxiety. Jewish kids were surrounded by Christmas, in schools, in stores, in the overwhelming sensory environment of American December. Parents didn't want their children to feel alienated or deprived, so Hanukkah grew. The gift industry codified its aesthetic, blue and white versus Christmas's red and green. A rigid colour binary that had no real basis in tradition but made commercial sense. Hanukkah bushes appeared, not Christmas trees because that would be assimilation, but trees decorated with Jewish symbols. Electric menorahs. 8 nights of gifts instead of 1 night. This created what came to be called the December dilemma, particularly acute in interfaith households. How do you navigate December when one parent celebrates Christmas and the other observes Hanukkah? The term Chrismukkah, popularized by the TV show The O.C. in 2003, became shorthand for hybrid celebrations. Pew Research found that 32% of Jewish Americans had a Christmas tree in their house. Some families joyfully celebrated both holidays. Others maintained strict separation. There was no single right answer, which was kind of the point. The monolithic Christmas was giving way to negotiated Decembers. The Latino influence on American Christmas traditions also accelerated during the 90s. Las Posadas, a 9-day procession reenacting Mary and Joseph's search for shelter, began appearing as public festivals in cities with large Latino populations: Los Angeles, San Antonio, Phoenix. What had been community-centric religious observances started entering the broader cultural consciousness, and the food changed. Tamales and tamaladas, family gatherings where people would make 200, 300 tamales in sessions lasting from midnight to 4 in the morning, became recognized as American Christmas traditions, not just Mexican ones. In Southern California and the Southwest, Christmas Eve menus routinely included pozole and buñuelos, alongside ham and turkey. This culinary syncretism reflected a deeper truth. American Christmas was becoming plural, not replacing one tradition with another, but accumulating traditions, stacking them. The 90s were when it became possible to celebrate Christmas without being Christian, to participate in the cultural ritual while opting out of the religious meaning. And quietly, almost invisibly, the digital age was beginning. Not in an obvious way yet. This was still the era of dial-up internet, of email that you checked once a day if you bothered checking it at all. But the foundations were being laid. Amazon was founded in '94, the same year as Mariah's song. At first it just sold books. The idea that it would eventually replace the entire mall-based Christmas shopping ritual would have seemed absurd. But the pieces were in place. The internet existed. E-commerce existed. The infrastructure that would eventually demolish the 80s mall culture was being built, one transaction at a time. We just didn't know it yet. The 90s Christmas, then, was a moment of expansion. The holiday was getting bigger, more inclusive, more diverse. But it was also getting more fragmented. The shared experience of a unified American Christmas, the version that had existed more or less from the 50s through the 80s, was dissolving. Not into nothing, but into options, choices, parallel celebrations happening simultaneously, sometimes overlapping, sometimes completely separate. And while this pluralism seemed like progress, it also created new tensions. If Christmas could mean anything, did it still mean something? If the holiday belonged to everyone, did it belong to anyone? These questions didn't have clear answers, but they were about to become the central battlefield of the next era. The early 2000s were when Christmas stopped being just a holiday and became a front in the culture wars. The transformation happened fast, and it happened on cable news. December 3rd, 2004. Bill O'Reilly launched his Christmas Under Siege segment on Fox News. The premise was simple and inflammatory. A vicious minority was trying to impose its will on the 90% of Americans who celebrate Christmas. Retailers were avoiding the phrase Merry Christmas in favor of inclusive Happy Holidays. This wasn't just political correctness run amok, it was an attack on Christian America. O'Reilly maintained a naughty list of retailers who refused to say Merry Christmas. Walmart, Target, Sears. Major corporations were publicly shamed for their holiday greetings, and the pressure worked. Walmart capitulated in 2006, reverting to explicit Christmas branding in its Christmas shop. The message was clear. If you wanted Christian customers, you'd better acknowledge Christmas by name. John Gibson's 2005 book, The War on Christmas, How the Liberal Plot to Ban the Sacred Christian Holiday, is worse than you thought crystallized conservative talking points. The argument was that secular progressives were systematically erasing Christianity from public life, and Christmas was ground zero for this cultural genocide. But here's the thing about the war on Christmas narrative. It wasn't new. The earliest articulation actually came from Henry Ford's anti-Semitic publications in the 1920s, which complained about secularization of Christmas cards. The John Birch Society published There Goes Christmas in 1959, blaming the UN and communists. The modern phrase appears to have been coined by white nationalist blog VDare around 2000, warning that Amazon's Happy Holidays email symbolized an attempt to abolish America. What changed in the 2000s wasn't the existence of these anxieties. It was their migration from fringe publications into mainstream political discourse. Fox News gave the narrative primetime coverage. Republican politicians adopted it. Donald Trump would later make it a campaign centerpiece, promising in 2015 that if he became president, we're going to be saying Merry Christmas at every store. After winning, he declared victory. You can say again Merry Christmas because Donald Trump is now the president. The absurdity of this, a president claiming credit for the resurrection of a phrase that had never actually disappeared, revealed what the war on Christmas was really about. Not protecting a genuinely threatened tradition, but creating a sense of cultural siege that could be politically mobilized. Christmas became a shibboleth. The greeting you used signaled your tribal affiliation. But polling revealed a more nuanced public reality than the cable news shouting suggested. A 2016 survey found only 34% of Americans believed there was a war on Christmas, down from 41% in 2013. 51% rejected the premise entirely. Monmouth University found 67% of Americans personally used Merry Christmas, but younger Americans increasingly expressed indifference. 61% of millennials said it didn't matter what greeting stores used. The partisan divide was stark. 87% of Republicans preferred Merry Christmas versus 58% of Democrats. But the dominant trend wasn't outrage, it was apathy. Most Americans had moved toward not caring very much about what anyone called the holiday season. While the greeting wars raged on cable news, a quieter but more consequential shift was happening in retail. The shopping mall, cathedral of the 80s, was beginning its long decline. 2005 was the year the National Retail Federation coined the term Cyber Monday. They'd noticed a spike in online spending the Monday after Thanksgiving as workers returned to offices with high-speed internet connections and used them to shop. That first Cyber Monday generated $484 million. By 2024, it would reach $13.3 billion, with shoppers spending $15.8 million per minute during peak hours. The rise of e-commerce didn't just offer convenience, it fundamentally changed the social nature of Christmas shopping. Mall traffic collapsed. From approximately 2,500 malls at the peak, only 700 to 1,150 remained by 2025. The retail apocalypse claimed Sears, Toys R Us, countless anchor stores that had once been the economic heart of suburban communities. The ecosystem that had supported professional Santas, holiday window displays, the whole theatre of in-person Christmas shopping, it was dying. Not dead, but dying. And into this void stepped a different kind of Christmas content. The Hallmark Channel, which had produced 1 or 2 Christmas movies annually in the 90s, ramped up production dramatically. 11 movies in 2010. 40 plus per year by 2017 through 2024. 52 holiday films in 2024 alone. These weren't big-budget productions. They cost around $2 million each, shot in 3 weeks in Canada. but they generated $350 million in annual advertising revenue, 1/3 of Hallmark's total, and they served a specific psychological function for millions of viewers. The Hallmark Christmas universe presented a fake America, monolithic, largely apolitical, community-focused. Small towns where everyone knew each other and problems got solved through kindness and fate. The plots were rigidly formulaic. Big city career woman returns to small town roots to save the family inn or bakery or festival, falls in love with the local contractor or teacher or veterinarian, rediscovers what really matters. This wasn't just entertainment, it was refuge. An escape from the fractious reality of the 2010s into a soft-focused world where Christmas still meant what it was supposed to mean, where communities still gathered, where capitalism existed but wasn't quite so rapacious, where the culture wars hadn't penetrated. Critics dismissed these movies as insipid, but dismissing them missed the point. They were comfort food for people exhausted by a decade of economic anxiety, political polarization, and cultural combat. The Hallmark universe offered a version of America that didn't exist and probably never had, but that people desperately wanted to believe in for 90 minutes. Meanwhile, a different kind of Christmas tradition was emerging, one that revealed how surveillance culture was infiltrating even the most intimate family spaces. The Elf on the Shelf, published as a book in 2005, involved a scout elf that watched children by day and reported back to Santa by night. The concept normalized constant observation for a generation of digital natives. Unlike the benevolent, distant Santa of previous eras, the elf brought judgment into the living room. It made surveillance playful, even cute, and it taught children that being watched was normal, expected, just part of how the world worked. This decade also saw the streaming revolution begin to reshape how families consumed Christmas entertainment. Netflix launched streaming in 2007. By the early 2010s, the classic television specials that had defined earlier generations' Christmases were fragmenting across platforms. A Charlie Brown Christmas, which once captured 50% of television viewers, moved from CBS to ABC to Apple TV Plus in 2020 behind a streaming paywall. Rankin Bass specials jumped to NBC. The shared cultural moment of everyone watching the same thing at the same time was dissolving. The 2000s and early 2010s Christmas then was defined by conflict and fragmentation. The culture wars over greetings, the collapse of shared shopping experiences, the retreat into formulaic fantasy, the migration of traditions from communal spaces to individual screens, and underneath it all, the ongoing decline of religious observance that made the whole war on Christmas narrative feel like fighting over the branding of something that had already fundamentally changed. Christmas was still huge, getting bigger actually in terms of spending and cultural footprint, but it was becoming harder to say what we were actually celebrating. The religious meaning had faded for most people. The communal rituals were dying. What remained was consumption and media and family obligation and a vague nostalgia for something we couldn't quite name. The 2010s were when technology stopped being something we used at Christmas and became the infrastructure through which Christmas happened. Not an addition to tradition, a replacement of it. Netflix didn't just change how we watched Christmas movies, it changed how Christmas stories were told. The binge release model, dropping entire seasons at once, required fundamentally different storytelling than traditional television. No commercial breaks to structure around. No week-long wait between episodes. The whole season was one long narrative that had to be engineered for continuous viewing. Shows like Breaking Bad and Stranger Things pioneered this approach, and their Christmas episodes or holiday-adjacent content revealed the formula. cumulative tension building across multiple episodes, each episode ending with a compelling beat that made clicking continue watching irresistible. Character development pacing that exploited binge behavior. Walter White's transformation from teacher to drug kingpin took 62 episodes, allowing gradual evolution that would have been impossible in broadcast television. The psychological mechanism was different from traditional TV too. Broadcast television used the Zeigarnik effect, unresolved cliffhangers that kept audiences thinking about shows between weekly episodes. Netflix, on the other hand, exploited the dopamine loop. The cliffhanger created cognitive tension, but instead of making you wait a week, the platform immediately offered resolution. Tension, relief, dopamine hit, and then the cycle repeated immediately. Research showed this created a perpetual feel-good feedback loop. The anticipation of what happens next was followed by resolution that the brain rewarded with dopamine, which created a craving to watch just one more episode. This biological reward reinforced binge-watching behavior in a way that traditional television couldn't match. But there was a trade-off. Shows designed for binging often didn't stick around in our memories, the way shows that made us wait did. The slow burn of weekly anticipation created deeper investment. Disney Plus and Max recognized this, making the biggest shift away from the binge drop and back to weekly or split-season releases. The weekly model wasn't just about stretching out subscription revenue, it was about creating sustained engagement and social TV discussion that pure binge content couldn't generate. Meanwhile, Amazon was systematically destroying what remained of brick-and-mortar Christmas shopping. E-commerce represented just 15% of holiday retail in 2019. By 2024, it reached 30%. Amazon alone was projected to capture $112 billion in holiday sales for 2025. But it wasn't just about convenience. Amazon introduced same-day and next-day delivery, eliminating the last-minute mall rush that had been a defining feature of Christmas for generations. The traditional deadline of you better shop by December 20th, or you're out of luck, evaporated. You could order on December 23rd and still get presents under the tree. The panic was removed, and with it went the adrenaline, the urgency, the specific Christmas shopping experience. The percentage of consumers who started shopping in October climbed to 43%. Black Friday's share of total holiday spending dropped nearly 13% between 2019 and 2024. The concentrated frenzy of a single shopping day was replaced by a diffuse, months-long accumulation of online purchases, and mobile commerce was taking over. Smartphones drove 59% of Thanksgiving Day sales in 2024. Over half of holiday e-commerce happened on phones. People were buying Christmas presents while standing in line at the grocery store, sitting in traffic, lying in bed at night. Shopping had become ambient, background activity, something that happened constantly, in small increments rather than as a dedicated event. The religious decline that had started decades earlier was now reshaping the holiday's meaning. The bifurcation into parallel religious and secular observances was complete. For 46%, it remained primarily religious. For the rest, it had become cultural tradition. Among millennials, only 40% celebrated as a religious holiday, versus 43% who viewed it as purely cultural. This created a strange dynamic. Christmas was simultaneously less religious and more culturally dominant than ever before. It had colonized a larger percentage of American culture, commerce, and consciousness than at any point in history. The season started earlier, lasted longer, generated more spending, occupied more mental space. But the animating religious belief underneath had faded for most participants. Google searches for church spiked highest during Christmas week, the Creaster phenomenon of people attending only on Christmas and Easter. Churches began treating these holidays as entrance ramps for potential converts, rather than lamenting sparse pews the rest of the year. 63% of Americans still viewed attending church services as integral to Christmas celebration, according to Lifeway research, though actual attendance statistics suggested practice didn't match sentiment. Family structures were changing too, reshaping the basic architecture of Christmas gatherings. In 1960, 73% of children lived with two married parents in their first marriage. By 2014, only 46% did. 41% of children were born outside marriage, up from 5% in 1960. This created the two Christmases phenomenon for children of divorce. Alternating years, split days, competing extended family obligations. Nearly 40% of divorced families reported fighting about holiday plans annually. Blended families developed adaptive strategies, celebrating on different days for different family units, moving extended gatherings to mid-December, creating entirely new traditions. The size of gatherings shrank. The massive extended family Christmases of the 70s, 30, 40, 50 people, became rare. In 2022, only 47% of households were married couples, down from 71% in 1970. The structural hub of the large family Christmas was fracturing. Gatherings of 8, 10, 12 people became the norm rather than the exception. And for those who couldn't or wouldn't gather with family, alternative structures emerged. Friendsgiving and Friendsmas became recognized terms around 2007. Google searches for Friendsgiving tripled between 2015 and 2019. YPulse research showed the number of young consumers celebrating Friendsgiving doubled since 2014. 46% of 13 to 39-year-olds plan to host holiday gatherings with chosen family. The drivers were varied: delayed marriage, urbanization, geographic separation from biological family, but also notably the desire to avoid family political disagreements. The polarization that had turned Christmas greetings into tribal identifiers made actual family gatherings minefields. Friendsmas offered an escape, chosen family who shared your values, or at least didn't argue about them over dinner. Generational differences in celebration widened dramatically. Gen Z surveys revealed striking departures from previous generations. 18% said they didn't celebrate Christmas at all, versus 11% of millennials and 3% of Gen X. 23% preferred spending Christmas with friends or alone, versus 9% of millennials. 26% wouldn't put up a Christmas tree, yet they still cherished certain traditions. 59% valued baking. 62% still watched Christmas movies. Their favourites included the same films beloved by their parents: Home Alone, Elf, A Charlie Brown Christmas. The form was changing, but some content remained surprisingly stable. This decade also saw the first systematic challenges to Christmas consumption on environmental grounds. Americans generated 25% more waste during the holiday season, an additional 5 million tonnes, including 4 million tonnes from wrapping paper and bags alone. Much wrapping paper wasn't recyclable due to glitter, foil, and laminate coatings. Returns contributed 16 million metric tonnes of carbon dioxide from shipping, and £5.8 billion of returned inventory ended up in landfills annually. Counter-movements emerged. Buy Nothing Day, created in '92 but gaining traction in the 2010s, was observed in 60-plus countries on Black Friday. REI closed on Black Friday entirely, launching its Opt Outside campaign, encouraging outdoor activities over shopping. Buy Nothing Christmas, formalised in 2001 by Canadian Mennonites, extended the principle through the entire season. Thriftmas and second-hand gift-giving gained mainstream acceptance, particularly among younger consumers. Mercari research found 63% of adults would be happy receiving second-hand gifts if aligned with their interests. 72% of Gen Z shoppers were open to thrifted gifts. The resale market responded. 20,000 plus shops generated approximately $15 billion annually, and platforms like Poshmark and ThredUp made second-hand shopping frictionless. The decade culminated in a development that would reshape everything: the COVID-19 pandemic. But before we get there, it's worth pausing to recognize how profoundly the 2010s had already transformed Christmas. The migration from physical to digital shopping, the collapse of religious observance paired with the expansion of cultural celebration, the fragmentation of families and traditions, the environmental reckoning, the generational divergence. By 2019, Christmas had become something almost unrecognizable from its 1970 form. The basic elements remained: trees, presents, gatherings, but the infrastructure underneath had been completely rewired. Technology mediated everything. Algorithms predicted what we wanted. Screens replaced in-person experiences. And the shared cultural moment of everyone doing roughly the same thing at roughly the same time had dissolved into a million personalized, optimized, atomized celebrations. Then came 2020, and the pandemic broke what remained of continuous tradition. The COVID-19 lockdowns hit in March, and by the time Christmas season approached, it was clear this would be a holiday unlike any other. Public health orders restricted travel and gatherings. The CDC recommended limiting Christmas to immediate household members only. For millions of families, this meant making an impossible choice: risk exposure or break decades of uninterrupted Christmas traditions. 93% of Americans still celebrated in some form, according to Lifeway research. But the methods shifted drastically. Church attendance, already in decline, plummeted further as services went virtual. The Zoom Christmas became a defining image of the pandemic era. Families gathered on screens, opening presents in separate living rooms while watching each other through cameras. It was connection, technically, but it was also a stark reminder of what was missing. The desire for tradition actually spiked. Christmas tree sales remained robust as people sought to nest and create sanctuary within lockdowns. Decorating became an act of defiance against the chaos. If you couldn't control the pandemic, at least you could control your living room. The tree became a focal point for children who'd lost school, adults who'd lost routine, everyone who'd lost the ability to plan beyond the current week. But the Zoom gathering proved to be a poor substitute for physical presence. Research from earlier years had found that video calls were more meaningful than phone calls. 61% of Skype users agreed they created deeper connection, and studies showed video chats reduced depressive symptoms by nearly 50% compared to phone calls. But that was for occasional long-distance communication. As a replacement for in-person Christmas, it fell short. The lost Christmas of 2020 created a sense of holiday fatigue, a re-evaluation of which traditions were essential and which were performative. Extended family gatherings that had felt obligatory suddenly became optional. The question shifted from how can we gather safely to do we actually want to gather this way at all? 2021 brought a different challenge: supply chain anxiety. Massive shipping container backlogs at ports meant consumers were warned to shop months in advance. This forced Christmas creep to start earlier than ever, not out of commercial pressure, but out of fear of empty shelves. People began shopping in September and October, not from excitement, but from panic. The psychological impact was significant. Christmas had always involved some level of consumer anxiety, getting the right gifts, finding good deals. But this was different. This was uncertainty about whether products would be available at all. The abundance Americans had taken for granted was suddenly in question. By 2022 and 2023, the challenge shifted from availability to affordability. Inflation soared to levels not seen since the 1980s. Holiday budgets tightened. Cheapflation hit holiday goods, where premium brands saw lower inflation rates than budget brands, disproportionately affecting lower-income celebrants. High-income households continued to spend, but lower-income families increasingly relied on buy now, pay later services to maintain the facade of abundance. 36% of Americans took on holiday debt in 2024, averaging $1,181. 65% of those who went into debt hadn't planned to. 57 to 60% reported significant stress from this debt. 17% were still paying off the previous year's balance when the next holiday season arrived. Total credit card debt reached a record $1.316 trillion by October 2025, with average interest rates exceeding 21%. The economics of Christmas celebration were breaking for a significant portion of the population. The pressure to maintain traditions, to provide for children, to perform normalcy, it was pushing people into debt they couldn't afford. A subtle but permanent shift occurred in gathering size. Even after restrictions lifted, the massive extended family reunions didn't fully return. The trend towards smaller, immediate family celebrations, accelerated by the pandemic, became the new norm. People had experienced Christmas with just their nuclear family and discovered it was actually kind of nice, less stressful, more intimate, easier to manage. This wasn't universal, of course. Many people desperately wanted to return to large gatherings and did so as soon as possible. But enough people opted for the smaller version that it changed the statistical baseline. The average Christmas gathering shrank and didn't bounce back. The pandemic also exposed and exacerbated mental health challenges during the holidays. The belief that suicide rates spike during Christmas is demonstrably false. CDC data consistently shows December has the lowest average daily suicide rate, with summer months highest. The Annenberg Public Policy Center has tracked media perpetuation of this myth since '99, finding 19 stories spreading the false narrative in the 2024 to 2025 season alone. But actual holiday mental health challenges are significant. Value Penguin surveys found 55 to 61% of Americans report experiencing sadness or loneliness during holidays. LGBTQ individuals showed 76%, Gen Z 75%, single adults 65%. Top causes included grieving lost loved ones at 43%, separation from family at 39 to 41%, and financial struggles at 38%. The pandemic amplified all of these. Separation from family became mandatory rather than chosen. Financial struggles intensified. The ability to distract yourself from grief through social activity evaporated. And the contrast between the idealized hallmark version of Christmas and the isolated, uncertain reality felt more stark than ever. Which brings us to now, 2024 and 2025. The algorithmic Christmas. The version where artificial intelligence doesn't just recommend products, it makes purchasing decisions. Surveys indicate 52% of consumers intend to use AI tools for holiday shopping in 2025. The primary use cases are price comparison, deal hunting, and summarizing product reviews. But the technology is moving beyond assistance toward agency. Agentic AI allows users to delegate actual purchasing. Tell an AI assistant to find a gift for someone based on their browsing history and budget, and it will buy it. No human decision required beyond the initial parameters. This detaches the giver from the act of shopping entirely. Gift giving becomes a logistical task managed by algorithms. And while this offers convenience, it also eliminates the last remaining element of personal investment. You're not choosing a gift. You're outsourcing that choice to software that processes data about the recipient and selects accordingly. The economics of Christmas 2025 reveal a starkly divided celebration. 79% of Americans enter the season with less than $1,000 saved for holiday expenses. Tip fatigue is causing pullbacks in charitable giving and service worker tipping, creating a leaner season for the service class. Budget-conscious consumers are cutting corners, trading down, using credit they know they can't easily repay. Conversely, the upper middle class is driving a boom in experiential gifts and travel. 2025 trends show a shift toward JOMO, joy of missing out, where travelers book longer, slower trips rather than frantic sightseeing tours. Destinations like Poland and Prague are seeing surges in winter interest. The bifurcation is stark. One group struggling to afford any celebration, another treating Christmas as an excuse for extended European vacation. Environmental consciousness has moved from niche concern to mainstream consideration. The rentable living Christmas tree market is growing. Trees you return to a nursery to grow for next year, reducing the 30 million trees harvested annually. LED lights have reduced energy load per bulb, but the sheer volume of lights has increased. Jevons paradox in action, efficiency gains leading to increased total consumption. The real versus artificial tree debate has generated substantial research. Real trees produce approximately 3.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide if properly composted or chipped, but 16 kilograms if land-filled. Artificial trees carry a carbon footprint around 40 kilograms and must be reused 5 to 20 years, studies vary, to offset their environmental impact. Most environmental analyses favour real trees with responsible disposal, though both options have committed advocates. The December dilemma for interfaith families persists. 32% of Jewish Americans have Christmas trees in their houses. Close to half of all non-Orthodox affiliated American Jewry are in Jewish Gentile couples, making negotiation of December traditions widespread. Chrismukkah exists. Hybrid celebrations exist. Strict separation exists. There's no single model, which reflects the broader fragmentation of Christmas into personalized versions. Technology has transformed communication in ways that would have seemed magical to 1970s families. Free video calling to anywhere in the world is routine. 85% of Americans own smartphones. The expensive long-distance phone calls that used to mark Christmas connection are now free and constant. Yet 62% of people, including millennials, still prefer receiving physical greeting cards. The greeting card industry has struggled with digital transition. Global market value dropped from $15.9 billion in 2022 to a projected $13.6 billion by 2027. USPS mail volume collapsed from a peak of 213 billion pieces in 2006 to 116 billion in 2023, a 46% decline driven by what the Postal Service calls electronic diversion. Online shopping's takeover is essentially complete. 58% of Christmas purchases were made online in 2023, up from 32% in 2015. Mobile commerce accounts for over half of holiday e-commerce. Same-day and next-day delivery have eliminated the last-minute mall rush. An estimated 2.3 billion packages will ship during the 2025 holiday season. Amazon dominates, 75% name it their go-to platform. The Hallmark industrial complex continues producing its formulaic comfort. 52 holiday films in 2024 alone. Netflix responded with its own Christmas cinematic universe, poaching Hallmark stars and producing higher-budget versions of essentially the same formula. The appetite for these movies remains strong, suggesting that millions of people still need the escape into a simplified, idealized version of Christmas that doesn't exist and never did. Labour concerns around holiday retail have intensified. The Make Amazon Pay coalition has organised Black Friday strikes for 6 consecutive years, with the 2025 Germany strike involving 3,000 workers described as the largest in Amazon's history. Retail workers report mandatory holiday shifts, algorithmic management, and inconsistent holiday pay policies. There's no federal mandate for holiday premium pay. Most major retailers have reversed Thanksgiving shopping hours. After years of escalating Black Thursday openings, Target, Walmart, and Costco all closed on Thanksgiving 2024 and 2025. The public cited giving employees time with family. Online petitions and boycotts contributed to the reversal. It's a small victory for workers, though it doesn't change the broader reality of retail working conditions. The cultural conversation around Christmas has reached a kind of exhausted stalemate. The war on Christmas narrative persists on conservative media, but has lost the urgency it had in the 2000s. Most people have moved to apathy about greetings. Use whatever phrase feels natural. The manufactured outrage couldn't sustain itself indefinitely, but the underlying tensions about whose Christmas gets prioritized, about the relationship between religious and secular celebration, about commercialization versus authenticity, those remain unresolved. We're just tired of fighting about them. The conflicts didn't get solved. They got abandoned out of fatigue. So here we are. 2025, 90% of Americans still celebrate Christmas in some form. That's higher participation than any other American holiday. Higher than Thanksgiving. Higher than the 4th of July. Higher than anything else on the calendar. But we're celebrating something different than what came before. For 46%, it remains primarily religious. Church attendance may be at historic lows, but for those who still go, Christmas retains its sacred meaning. The nativity story, the divine birth, the theological significance, that's still real for tens of millions of people. For the rest, Christmas has become cultural ritual, a secular tradition for family togetherness, gift-giving, and annual renewal. The trappings remain: trees, presents, gatherings, but the animating belief has shifted. It's not about Christ, it's about connection, however you define that. This bifurcation allows the holiday to survive in a deeply divided nation. You can celebrate Christmas as sacred religious observance. You can celebrate it as cultural tradition. You can even celebrate it as purely commercial event. The holiday is elastic enough to hold all these versions simultaneously. The question nobody wants to ask directly is whether this elasticity is strength or weakness. Does Christmas survive because it's adaptable? Or has it survived by becoming so diffuse that it barely means anything specific? The numbers suggest both answers are true. Holiday retail spending will cross $1 trillion in 2025. That's real. That's power. Christmas drives 20% of annual retail sales in 2 months. It determines whether retailers survive the year. It generates more travel, more gathering, more economic activity than any other period on the calendar. But religious observance has collapsed. Weekly church attendance at 30%, the nones at 28%, 46% celebrating as cultural tradition rather than religious observance. The foundation that supported Christmas for 2,000 years has cracked and shifted and partially crumbled. What we have now is Christmas as infrastructure. It's baked into the economy, into the calendar, into family expectations and social obligations. You can opt out individually, but the institution persists whether you participate or not. Stores will decorate, music will play, algorithms will suggest products. Pressure to buy and gather and perform will build regardless of your personal beliefs. The transformation from 1970 to 2025 is staggering when you lay it out. We went from energy crisis light rationing to smart LED displays controlled by phone apps. From Sears Wishbook to AI-powered shopping assistants. From church as the centre of celebration to church as optional component. From downtown shopping districts to enclosed malls to e-commerce dominance. From unified cultural moment to fragmented personalised celebrations. We traded the anxiety of oil shortages for the anxiety of supply chain disruptions. We replaced mall Santa experiences with algorithmic gift recommendations. We exchanged 12 hours a month at the mall for constant ambient mobile shopping. We substituted Hallmark movies for actual community connection. And somehow, through all of this, the basic human desire for ritual persisted. People still want to mark the darkest days of the year with light and gathering. They still want to give gifts and express love. They still want their children to experience magic and anticipation. The forms changed radically, but the underlying impulses remained constant. The unresolved tensions are what make Christmas in 2025 feel so complicated. We claim to hate commercialization while spending record amounts. We complain about stress while creating more obligations. We say family time matters while staying glued to screens. We want authentic connection, but settle for algorithmic efficiency. 55 to 61% of Americans report sadness or loneliness during the holidays. That's more than half. During what's supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, most participants experience negative emotions. Yet we keep doing it, year after year, generation after generation. Maybe that's the real story. Not that Christmas changed, though it obviously did, but that we keep celebrating it despite the changes making it less satisfying for most people. The trillion-dollar spending, the month-long commercial event, the culture war battlefield, the algorithmic optimization. None of it produces the connection and joy we claim to want. But we can't seem to stop. Because underneath the commercial excess and the political warfare and the technological mediation, there's still that basic human need for ritual, for marking time, for gathering with people you care about, or at least people you're related to, for creating moments that feel different from ordinary life. Christmas survived the energy crisis. It survived stagflation. It survived crime waves and mall culture, and the internet and the pandemic. It absorbed Kwanzaa and Christmaka and Friendsmas. It accommodated religious decline and cultural expansion. It bent and stretched and transformed without breaking. The version we have now would be unrecognizable to someone from 1970. The mechanics are completely different. But walk into someone's living room on Christmas morning and you'd recognize the scene. There's a tree. There are presents. There are people trying to create something special despite the chaos. That's what endured. Not the specific traditions or beliefs or practices. Those all changed, some beyond recognition. What endured was the attempt, the wanting, the hope that this year maybe it would feel the way it's supposed to feel, the way we remember it feeling, or imagine it felt for previous generations, or fantasize it could feel if we just got everything right. 90% of Americans celebrate Christmas. After 55 years of transformation that dismantled almost everything about how and why we celebrate, we're still doing it. That's not a story of decline. It's not a story of progress either. It's a story of resilience, of adaptation, of humans finding ways to maintain ritual even as the world around them changes beyond recognition. The Christmas of 2025 isn't better or worse than the Christmas of 1970. It's just different. Adapted to different anxieties, different technologies, different family structures, different beliefs. And 55 years from now, in 2080, people will look back at how we celebrated and find it equally strange. They'll wonder how we managed with such primitive technology. They'll be baffled by our quaint concerns. They'll have their own version, transformed by changes we can't predict. But they'll probably still have trees and presents and gatherings. Because that's what Christmas has always been, underneath all the changes. An excuse to make ordinary time feel special. To give gifts and receive them. To gather with people and mark the year's passage. The forms will keep changing. The attempt will continue, and 90% of Americans, give or take, will keep celebrating something, even if they're not quite sure what it is. That's the American Christmas. Resilient, contradictory, commercial, sacred, secular, traditional, innovative, exhausting, magical, disappointing, hopeful, all at once, all the time, changing constantly while somehow remaining recognizable. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, or whatever greeting feels right to you. That's the point. It's yours to make what you want of it. That's what the last 55 years taught us. Christmas means whatever we decide it means, and we'll keep deciding, year after year, argument after argument, purchase after purchase, gathering after gathering. The story isn't over. It's just taking a breath before the next transformation begins.